All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how's it going, man?
Things are good. Things are good. Yeah, people are definitely starting to get into the swing of things. I know January kind
Yeah.
of flew by, February did as well, but yeah, definitely a lot of chatter, folks getting set up, trying to get optimized. So yeah, things are going good.
Yeah, it's funny because we're officially in March now. This is the first office hours we're doing in March, and it's funny because I felt like we're going into the fourth month of the year. That's just what it feels like with all the
Yeah.
changes happening. Um, but yeah, it's I feel like now's the time where, if you took a break, now's when you really want to start to get back into the weeds, strategizing. And we kind of talked about this, kind of coming out of Q4, right? Like January is a good time to kind of take a pause, really look at your data, see what worked, see what didn't work, re-strategize and make some, changes going into the new year. But
Mhm.
now's when it starts to really, really matter because the rest of the year is going to fly by.
Definitely.
I love starting these out with some awesome, crazy news. What's happening in the world? Not a ton this week, which is kind
Mhm.
of boring. I mean, there's been some AI stuff, but nothing to write home about, nothing that's like earth shattering. But with that said, we got some cool announcements coming out. We have a new integration coming out either this week or next week, as well as a pretty big product release. So it's going to be pretty exciting few weeks for us looking forward. And then a lot happening in the background in stealth mode. It's going to take us a little bit longer to get built out, but we got some fun stuff going on there, which is exciting. But yeah, it's funny. This week feels more like a lull week in the seller space.
Mhm.
Even on socials, there's not a ton of chatter, which I think is kind of nice because there's been a lot of drama lately with
Yeah.
policy changes. Section 3 is kicking back off a little bit more, at least from what I've seen. And I think the universe gave sellers maybe a little bit of a pause this week and say, you know what, you can have a breather, sit down, relax a little bit.
Yeah, definitely a lot of moving pieces over the last month or so. So kind of nice to come up for air for a little bit. Maybe we're getting a little
Yes.
bit more adjusted to new workflows, new day-to-day operations with some of the changes that are coming. So yeah, definitely nice to get a little reprieve from what seems like constant adjustments to start the year.
Yeah, it is funny that obviously we geek out with AI pretty heavily here, but I'm starting to see a few more sellers talk about using AI. And I
Mhm.
like the sentiment of like, hey, if you're not using AI, you're getting left behind. Or, if you're only using ChatGPT, you're getting left behind. Those are, kind of tongue in cheek, shock factor. I think there is some truth to it, though. I don't think you're necessarily going to get left behind because you're not as nerdy about this kind of stuff as we are. But I think the truth that lies in those types of statements is you should be looking at these things. You should be
Mhm.
seeing how the world is shifting. Um, AI is going to unlock, and I'm just going to call it tech, right? Let's just be broad here. I think tech is going to make a lot of impossible things possible for sellers. If we just look at, selling multi-channel, right? This portfolio approach that we've been talking about selling on Amazon and Walmart, that's very complex for a lot of people. There's a lot more moving parts. Selling on one platform is one thing. When you start to sell on both platforms, it's very easy for you to start making decisions that are not rational. You're not making good data driven decisions. Why? Because a lot of that data is siloed and not, the average seller is not a data analyst. They don't know how to, combine all this information and make sense of it. That's really difficult. But tech enables us to do that more easily. So these things that feel daunting of like, oh, I would like to be able to do that, but I don't know how. A lot of that starts to go away relatively fast, which I think is a massive positive, but you should be looking at these things. You should be learning and just experimenting, playing around, see what's possible, what's not possible. I haven't seen any crazy cool like AI specific use cases from sellers quite yet.
Mhm.
I'm hearing a lot of chatter about sellers using it, but nobody's saying how they're using it. And it's driving me insane because I want to know.
Yeah.
Um, I have some
Yeah.
general ideas, but I want to hear how people are using it themselves.
Yeah, I know we talked about before some people starting to use it in like sourcing manners to just like generally compare, like, hey, what's the difference between this product and that product? I'd
Yeah,
also heard some folks kind of using it to help generate more effective product descriptions, which we know may
totally.
be a big piece of the puzzle specifically on Walmart.
Yep.
But yeah, I was going to ask if you'd seen any specific use cases. So it's funny that folks are maybe trying to keep their AI best practices to themselves for now, but I'm sure that'll open up as we've
Yeah.
seen kind of like the general space open up recently. And yeah, like we always talk about, I mean, try out platforms, try different things. Don't do it so much that you're constantly flipping. Once you find something that works, I recommend sticking to it and trying to optimize a different part of your process. But every business is different, whether it's focusing on different listings, different strategies overall. So I always say, like, you want to make sure that your platform works for you and you're not working for your platform. So
Right.
make sure that if you follow someone or you're in a community and something that's working really well for a handful of folks there, try it out. But if it's causing more headaches than relieving them, maybe look for a different solution or go back to what's been working well before. It's unfortunately not like a black and white, oh, it works or it doesn't. There are a lot of nuances and colors in between. So just want to make sure that you're doing what's best for you and then adjusting based on those results. How do you make things easier? Things like that.
Yeah. I got asked to come back to a group. So I speak to a lot of groups and do a lot of teaching. And they're like, hey, can you come back and just show us AI? I'm like, yeah, we can have that discussion, talk about, fears that people have and things like that. It was a great conversation. I think it was like 2.5 hours long. So we really went down into the weeds. Where a lot of people got stuck, and I think this is where a lot of sellers might get stuck jumping into this world, is there's kind of two things happening right now. There are things that are possible, but you have to create it yourself, which is obviously more complicated. The other side of that is somebody built that for you for that use case. So it's an interesting technology where you can build for your own use case, but it's far more complicated. You got to understand logic. There is some coding in some cases. So there's this weird dichotomy where people or paradox where sellers are like, oh, cool. Like it can do all these things. Yes. Well, I just wanted to do this. You got to go build it to do that for now. It's, like my email scheduler, like I can build that, but then a tool called Howie.ai came out with, and I don't have to build it now. It just works and they keep making it better and I don't have to think about it. That's a good example of that. I could do it myself and I have done it myself, but now it just does it for me. Awesome. Same thing with, email organization, using Lindy.ai to, auto label and organize my inbox. I could do that. Way more complicated. But now Superhuman, my email client, just does it for me automatically. So I'm like, cool. I don't need the version that I built. They did a tremendously better job than I ever could with it. Okay, cool. I think we'll start to see that trend come over to seller software, right? Yeah. It's funny because if we think about repricing, right, strategies, a lot of accounts, and this is prior to us launching Maven, this is why we launched Maven, we had a lot of sellers that had, 12 something strategies. And they're like, and we're like, all right, well, why do you have 12? How are you doing this? Like, well, in this case, I'm going to do that. In this case, I'm going to do that. I'm like, okay, so you're kind of tweaking the gears, the levers here yourself in real time. It's better than not doing it, but it's also not the best use of your time from a value perspective. So that's when we said, okay, you could do that yourself, or we could just build it into the product and the product does it for you and does it better than you could. It's that same philosophy, right? And so I think we're going to start to see that in a lot of other areas of selling software, from sourcing to inventory management, like across the board. Our software is essentially becoming intelligent, which is cool, which sounds scary, but it's actually really amazing because it can understand your data. It can understand what you're trying to achieve, even if you don't know how to do that. A lot of sellers can know the what of what they want to get done, but not the how. And that how is pretty interesting. So I think it's going to be a cool trend. I think it's going to shake up the selling space quite a lot, but in a positive way. Again, I'm going to keep harping on, my optimism here. It's going to allow you to be able to do things that you otherwise couldn't do. Even seeing people on X, sharing screenshots like, hey, here's 2 sales 6 minutes apart. You raised my price from $15.90, I think it was like $15.96 was the example I was looking at yesterday, to $25 and got a sale. They couldn't have done that, not by themselves, not as a human.
Yeah.
And so that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, the two main reasons people use tech at all is for effectiveness and efficiency. It's either more
Yeah.
effective or it's more efficient. So
Right.
and I think Aura is one of those platforms that provides both. It's more effective and it's more efficient. So it provides better results and saves you more time. It
Yeah.
may, save more time for others as opposed to results, but those are really the two levers that are really the value plays for any tech platform, but especially Aura, if you're managing, 300 listings, that's going to take half your day to optimize all those listings daily. And you can invest that time in other areas, sourcing. Sourcing is the most important. Couldn't think of a second example fast enough.
Basically
just reinvesting your time in sourcing. So yeah, I always try to remind folks that, hey, it may be providing the same or just slightly better results, but how valuable is your time? How much more money are you making with the time that you're spending elsewhere, and trying to really paint the picture in that sense? So yeah, I think just about every platform falls into one of those two buckets, and Aura happens to be one that falls into both. So yeah.
I'm glad you brought up this model of like the efficiency and effectiveness, because the past decade, I've said most tools in the seller space are efficiency-based tools. They speed you up. But if you're not effective at doing that thing and you add one of these tools, you just become efficiently ineffective. What I think could happen if we want to, readdress this in a different light is those efficiency tools could become effectiveness tools as well. That's, I think, a massive opportunity. If you look at like your sourcing software, stuff like that, most of the time it's really just making you more efficient. It's not like solving the problem necessarily. It's helping you solve the problem. But what if that changed? That's the kind of, mindset I think sellers need to be looking at, and what software developers need to be kind of considering as well. Yeah, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be very exciting. But yeah, it's funny as we dive, kind of shifting gears here over to the Walmart side, looking at the growth rate on Walmart is pretty interesting. Like, I think it was 2022, there's like 150,000 sellers compared to the however many millions on Amazon. And their growth rate that year for sellers was 60%. I think it's safe to assume that as of Q4 last year, 2024, that number is probably higher. So I anticipate massive growth in terms of competition on the platform, which not necessarily a bad thing. It's still, relatively speaking, peanuts compared to Amazon. But it makes sense why sellers are wanting to shift over. It's not just the different fee structures and stuff like that and lower storage fees and what have you. It is the competitive landscape. And they're a little bit more, strict about approving sellers. And so we're already seeing, I was joking with a seller the other day of like, all the sellers who are getting banned on Amazon because they're breaking TOS and doing shady stuff are like, oh, now I'm selling on Walmart. Come take this course to learn how I got banned on Amazon, but now I'm doing it on Walmart. And then they get banned on Walmart. You're still going to have some of that. It's the greener pasture problem. It is I make money through courses and I'm now banned on Amazon, so I can't get screenshots and figure things out there. So I'll go over here, and now my course is Walmart focused instead of Amazon focused. But that person actually is not crushing it. They're not succeeding. They're not scaling. They're not profitable. It's funny just how the behaviors of certain segments of sellers just move, right? It's the same old shtick, but they go from platform to platform to platform. And it's a bit frustrating because how do you determine who is trustworthy from a knowledge standpoint? There are few people in the space that I genuinely back and would back time and time again. And we're figuring out those people on the Walmart side now. We've been talking to a lot of these people, and there's definitely some that are on that shadier side. And there are some that are genuinely passionate and authentic and doing real numbers. And I've been able to verify that. So you have the same problems here, right? It's human nature, unfortunately. And I think sellers making that transition are probably struggling with some of the same problems that they struggled with when they first started selling on Amazon, which is figuring out who's trustworthy and what's what actually works versus what people are talking about. Like, you got to parse through all this stuff, all this information. And, even if you're succeeding on Amazon, you transition over to Walmart, you kind of have to go back through that same process, because it's not the same people you're learning from a lot of times. In some cases, there's, somebody who's been teaching for, a decade, very trustworthy, authentic, can back up everything. And they started to move over to Walmart and figure it out themselves and say, okay, here's what I'm seeing work. Here's what I see doesn't work. Things can change. So luckily there are some really solid people on, both platforms that are teaching in a authentic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's always going to be snake oil salesmen and smoke and mirrors in every area of life, and Walmart/Amazon space is no different. So always take everything with a grain of salt. Just a reminder, every business is different. So what may be working for someone or in reality may not be working for someone in the background, make sure you kind of double check your process, make sure everything's lined up for what's best for you. Yeah.
In one thing, I at least I see this on my Twitter feed all the time, is the AI trading bots. Complete scam. Literally a model gets released that day and I start to see posts, ads. Oh, my DeepSeek R1 trading bot made me $500,000, blah, blah, blah. You're seeing that kind of grift with AI across industries. Mm-hmm. So it's probably not much longer before we start to see how I automated my Amazon business with AI agents. Pay me $1,000 and I'll teach you how. We're not there yet, just for the record. So if somebody's trying to sell you that today, it's not happening. And this is why it's important to understand how things work, what things are capable of and what they're certainly not capable of quite yet, to be able to say, no, like, unless this random human being on the internet cracked the code that these billion-dollar companies have not been able to do, I don't see it. So you're going to have to be on your guard with a lot of this stuff. A lot of the AI hype already kind of happened, but it's starting to circle back now, because now the new moniker that people are trying to latch onto is AI agents. Before it was just the AI grift. Now it's AI agents. We don't have those yet. We're just not there. There's some arguments to say we do. I pretty much disagree. And there will be another thing, this is the hard part with anything tech, especially AI. It's such a broad term. So there's concepts like swarm AIs or, AI societies. One thing I saw yesterday was a demo. I think it was YC backed, actually. So Y Combinator, they basically pull in all the data of your LinkedIn followers. You write your posts and you simulate what would happen comment wise, everything using that data. And then you can say, hey, make this better. They will spin up 100 variations, rerun the simulation, say, this is the one that performed the best. Okay, that's pretty cool. Some people call that a swarm. But just because it sounds cool does not mean it is applicable in every single scenario. And, at the end of the day, you are simulating something. So it's not a guarantee. And I think a lot of people take this like, well, it said it was going to crush it and it didn't. Yeah. Welcome to a simulation. It may work, it may not work. And it's only as good as the data it has access to. So we're going to start to see a lot of software doing that kind of stuff, and some will do well. I think there is opportunity there. Some are going to oversell and overpromise pretty heavily. And I'm seeing this right now with AI-based SDRs, so sales development reps. 11x.ai is one of those. Really cool site, really cool company, really cool concept. Absolutely amazing idea. But when you look at reviews, people are like, it's not really there yet. Now, could we get there? Of course we can. But again, understanding the actual performance of these fantastical things is understanding that right now they're not quite there, but they will be. And you kind of have to keep those two things in your brain at the same time, which is difficult. Just because something doesn't work today doesn't mean it won't work tomorrow, because some new model got released and all of a sudden it worked. There's a big trend right now with Y Combinator startups. They're raising money. They're sitting on top of AI, and the thing they're trying to achieve will not work. Can't do it. Two months later, A new model gets released, they test it, and all of a sudden it works overnight. This is difficult. This is so difficult as a seller to view this kind of stuff and be like, oh, I could have, I do wholesale, and I do a lot of cold outreach and a lot of cold calling to brands and distributors. I want to use that kind of tech to help me open up accounts more frequently. That's not a bad idea, but you could find yourself, at least as of today, trying these things and not really seeing great results. But that shouldn't mean that you take all that stuff and just write it off and say, okay, that doesn't work. It could work in 3 to 6 months. So keep a pulse on those things. And part of that issue is, how do you judge those things to understand what's possible and what's not possible? How do you judge when things will be possible if they're currently not? And how do you parse through the grift? A lot of people right now are teaching AI. I mean, there's nothing special there. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff can be outdated by the time you're looking at it, right? So at the end of the day, it's a rabbit hole is what it is. But it's one of the few rabbit holes that you should actually be paying attention to. Just don't lose your mind going to the depths of the rabbit hole, because you certainly can. I definitely have. And, I've fallen for those traps as well of, oh, AI can just do that. Well, conceptually, yeah, but it can kind of do it. It's like 40% of the way there. Well, that's not good enough. I need at least 80%. But then again, 2 months later, I'm at 90%. All right, now I'll start to use that.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But the space is moving so rapidly that if you come across something that sounds too good to be true, really stress test it for your own model. Really kind of get, the proof is always going to be in the statistics and the metrics. So if you're trying something and you see those dip, or it's not being as effective as you'd like, it probably just isn't quite there yet. So it is tough, especially with things moving so rapidly and all these kind of catchy headlines and quick fixes, things like that. It's hard not to fall into the shiny object syndrome and kind of just be like, oh, this is going to be great, just getting set up. So yeah, definitely don't necessarily abandon anything that's been working really well in lieu of something that seems like it might. Stress test it, make sure it's a good fit before kind of putting all your eggs in that basket.
Well, here's a good example. Tesla had their big, and I'm a Tesla fan for the record. They had a big event showing off the Tesla robot and the new Cyber Cab. They had these robots pouring drinks and walking around and stuff. Those were teleoperated, meaning there was a human in some shack somewhere with VR headsets and some controls, and the human was doing that and speaking. So people are like, oh, we're here, it's done. Not true. They never lied, but they also weren't just like, hey, by the way, this is teleoperated, don't freak out. Like, it's cool, but it's not that cool. Like, nobody's going to do that. So even on stuff like that, you kind of have to pause and say, okay, well, was this demo or this thing that I saw the actual product working the way it's being positioned? You see this with software a lot of times. The demo looks amazing, but was that a bunch of images? Because, I mean, listen, you prototype, right? You have to visualize what it looks like before you build it, before you write the code. In a lot of cases, especially a lot of startups, they'll create a video that showcases how they want it to work, but they haven't gotten there yet. And that's that kind of false promise. Now they're trying to say, hey, this is what we're building. And yeah, they're building it. But is that what they actually have today? And same thing for the robots, right? Like, is this actually doing its own thing, making its own decisions, or is it teleoperated? Still impressive, the mechanics, but now we're taking one massive aspect of it and removing it. And that's a different product to me. And so you have to be able to ask those kind of questions. Like, does this actually do the thing that you're showing me it does? Like, show me the product doing it, not just the video. So yeah, you see that a lot in startups right now. And it's kind of frustrating because I see demos and I'm like, yes, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then you get into the weeds of it. You're like, oh, they're not actually there yet. It can't do that thing that you showed me. I saw one for an AI wearable, and they had this like thing like kind of put on. If you ever seen Black Mirror, like the kind of Star Trek episode, he like puts a thing and like neurologically like puts him into the game. It's like that kind of hardware, but for like speaking to it and getting things done. And I was like, oh, super cool. Love this. And then you look into it, they haven't built it yet. And it's really just this concept. But why would you do a whole product demo and video and stuff, like a launch video basically, and be like, oh, you can pre-order it, but we haven't made it yet. And we're not sure how. What are we doing here?
Yeah. It always cracks me up how certain companies and, you know, whether it's tech, actual company, not that tech companies aren't actual companies, you know what I mean? Different companies in different industries. I mean, they'll specifically build their demo product, their demo video for the demo. It's not built on things that are actually functional right now. That happens all the time with video games. And, you know, you'll see trailers of movies that they don't even use the same footage in the trailer as they do in the movie. So it's always trying to sell an ideal image. And then when you get down to reality and when it's actually functioning or it's not even available for months, maybe years, it's definitely frustrating. And I understand why companies do it, but it definitely sets improper expectations from the jump.
It makes it easy to raise money is what it does. It looks cool. It's exciting, but doesn't end up going anywhere, which is frustrating. Like I pre-ordered cool AI device that like was supposed to hook up to a server and basically be able to do anything just with this little puck. Super excited. The demo was incredible. And I ended up getting refunded. They're like, oh yeah, sorry, we're just going to outsource this and like people can build whatever they want. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll just go build whatever I want. Pain in the butt. Couldn't get it to work. I'm like, see, you know, you had me sold on this Star Trek level tech, and then you removed it from my life. Painful. So painful. Because to me, I have this vision for what it would be like to be almost like a futuristic seller, right? Like whether it's my phone I'm talking to or, you know, an AI hardware thing, I don't know, but I want to be able to have conversations and have it do things for me. I want to have that level of interaction with my tech, my computer, software, APIs, whatever, and just say, hey, that one PPC campaign that is labeled X for, you know, working for Y, go ahead and reduce the bid by 25%, or go ahead and pause that. I don't want to have to log in, find it, deal with the UI. I just want the thing that I want done. And I think we'll get there. But that's the exciting part. You know, it's like, could you talk to your phone and have Aura create a workflow just from your natural language? Like these are the kind of things that get me excited. You know, like what does that look like? That human computer interaction look like moving forward? And there's a lot of experiments happening on that exact kind of thing. But again, we're not quite there yet. So all the demos I see that are doing those things, I'm like, no, you haven't launched yet. And like, it's behind this wait list and it's been a year. What are we doing here? But then again, I see things that it's not a demo. It got launched when it was announced, like Raycast. I'm a huge fan of the tool Raycast. On their pro tier, which is like $20 a month, they have what are called AI extensions. So the way Raycast works is anybody can build an extension for any application, right? So like I can interact with Linear, Google Docs, my calendar, Zoom, everything just using this little command prompt on my Mac. Well, now they have it set up where you can create these AI extensions. So you're not just like searching and like hitting a specific command. You're tagging the extension, saying what you want done, and then it's creating the actions for you and just doing it. And you can give it rules and protocols and all these different kind of like safety nets. That works. And like literally within an hour of them launching, people are like, oh, here's what I built. That's what we want. Like real, right? So it's like the end game that we're all, I am super excited for. Not everybody is. Not there yet, but a version of that does kind of exist. It's just we're not using voice necessarily. We're typing, but like that can still kind of get done. And that's part of that dichotomy that we've been talking about, which is we're making progress, but we're not quite to that magical, holy crap, everything just changed overnight. We're not there yet.
Yeah, it is so interesting to see how quickly things have changed. I mean, I constantly see, AI renderings of different prompts and what it looked like 9 months ago compared to now, and
Yeah.
it is a world's difference. But yeah, it's so funny to kind of have current functionality in different tools and have them, extrapolate, oh, like this is the finish line, but they don't really indicate, yeah, we're probably about halfway through the race, or we're just getting
Yeah.
started. You don't really know how quickly or not quickly these ideas will come to fruition. So,
Right.
yeah, like
Actually,
ideal.
I like using AI for that reason because I have that problem myself. And so I'll jump into Perplexity, turn on their deep research mode. So it takes like 5 minutes sometimes, and like really goes out there and finds the answer and writes like a full blog post for me. And I'll ask it things like, how far away are we from Jarvis? Break down the components of what that means. Like, be as accurate as possible. Give me an idea of where we're at today, what's technically possible, and what's left to sort out. And think of a timeline that could make sense. And it'll go off for 5 to 10 minutes, come back, be like, all right, here's where we're at. Here's what's possible. Here's what's not possible. Here's what, so-and-so is working on to solve that problem. We're probably about 5 years away. Okay, that's kind of cool. How accurate is that? No idea. Nobody has any clue. But some of those burning questions you can answer, which is pretty fun. But you got to know what model to use and stuff like that. That's where it gets kind of annoying. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, imagine being able to take all your data, ask it some crazy question, and have it go think for 5 to 10 minutes and come back after you went downstairs, grabbed a coffee, came back up, and it's like, hey, here's that crazy answer to that crazy question you had. Or, help me optimize this. Okay, let's go find out what the best practices are. Let's go find out this and that. And then, okay, let's strategize. Okay, here's what needs to happen. Here's a bunch of data that's going to help give me context. Okay, you should probably do X, Y, and Z. And that could be as simple as listing optimization, right? I mean, we talked about Rufus a few weeks back, I believe, where the AI search kind of component is starting to change the way people are searching for stuff. So like Perplexity has really changed, or is starting to change searching for products. Like I use Perplexity for that now, unless I know exactly what I want, in which case I'm going straight to Amazon. Rufus is trying to basically do that internally just on Amazon, but that fundamentally changes how you do SEO on these kind of platforms. Mm-hmm. But once people figure out best practices, then you could just load those up into an AI and say, here's all the details. You have the context, the best practices, everything. And maybe we give it some more data of like what performs well and what doesn't perform well, things that are not explicitly mentioned. They're just more implied, and just have it do it for you. And it can do it incredibly fast. That stuff's coming. I mean, yeah. You could realistically do that now, but again, it goes back to that original dichotomy, which is like, you can build it yourself, a little bit more complicated, a little bit more time, a little bit more work. Eventually there will be a tool that just was built for that purpose, that you just say, here's $20 a month to do it for me.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, I need better research tools. My fantasy baseball season's coming up, but I don't think AI is going to get there just in time. But yeah, it's really interesting how just AI search engines in general, though they are searching for, or like on a human's behalf, if you will, they go about that research very differently. So needing to optimize SEO for how both humans and AI are peeling through the internet, looking for common terms, different outcomes, things like that. It has really shifted just marketing as a whole. And right now that's for just like general search things. But as folks start to use AI more frequently to be like, what's the best product for this given these circumstances, that's going to fundamentally change how you want to list your products. Product descriptions, like I mentioned earlier, are going to become that much more important, having them tailored both to users and AI researchers, for lack of a better term. So yeah, it's definitely impacting things now, not too immensely just yet, but we'll continue to kind of slide the scale in the AI direction as folks start to use tools like Perplexity rather, compared to typical like Google search engines and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. If you want to experience what a future could look like, go download Raycast. You can use it for free. I don't even pay for Pro. I might, just because these AI extensions are actually kind of selling me on it. You could very easily see a world where Raycast comes out with a phone, and they're working on an iOS app now. I'm on the wait list. I'm begging them to let me in. Please let me beta test. You could see a world where there's no real UI. It's just, what do you want to get done? All right, do it. And it goes and does it for you. I mean, that's incredible. Now imagine that concept, it's using these general tools, but now imagine that all your Amazon and all your Walmart softwares are hooked up to something like that. What do I need to be aware of? What are some tasks that, exist in all of my tools? Summarize them for me. Tell me next actions. Okay, I need to do this. Okay. I got these 4 listings that got created on, that I'd recently created, and I need to go do something with them in Aura. Hey, for these 4 SKUs, copy paste, enable repricing, and apply my level 1 strategy, or apply Maven to it. Okay, give me 5 seconds. That's done. We'll get there. We definitely will. These are the things that keep me up late at night, and probably why I read way too much sci-fi. Because that's the kind of world that allows the individual business owner, the individual seller, to accomplish dramatically more than they otherwise could have. Because it's not just efficiency, back to our previous point. That makes you more effective too. Because if you have these kind of rules of how certain things are done or whatever, it's going to get done that way. And so if you take the human, not the human out of the loop, like you would still be the initiator of whatever actions, but the actions being done, they're going to get done the exact same way every single time, unless you tell it explicitly to do it differently. But we as humans struggle with that. It's why we've always recommended you read the book, the Checklist Manifesto. Great, fantastic book, Atul Gawande, or Dr. Atul Gawande. Short book, but absolutely impactful. Well, why is it impactful? Because if you can create processes or checklists for yourself, you don't have to remember them, and you certainly won't forget them. Because if you say, I got to do 1, 2, 3, and 4, and those steps in that order, if I do it that way, I won't have any issues, then you won't have any issues. A lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people won't sit down and it doesn't feel like productive work. But it's one of those things that when you start to implement, it makes you better. And all those headaches that get created randomly start to fall away. And those headaches, by the way, take up your time. So by investing in things like checklists and stuff like that and processes, even if it's just for you, even if you're the only one who does it, even better. You won't have those headaches. So if you keep making a mistake, great, add that to your checklist. Find the solution to say, okay, well, if I do this, that headache won't ever happen. Great. You just eliminated that entire headache. It's taking that manual process and saying, you go do it for me. Here it is. And heck, you find the problems, right? Eventually it's like, go find the problems. Tell me how to fix them. All right. Update. Done. Again, that's the futuristic version, but where we're at now with tools like Raycast, even with just basic paper pen checklists, is still pretty impressive. But a lot of the advanced kind of tech stuff is based on human things that are not super cool, but work. So if you understand those base things, you're probably going to do well. A lot of the papers that are coming out on, who's going to do well with AI versus who's not, has pretty much pointed to amazing managers will get the best benefit from AI. Why is that? Because they're great communicators. Well, what are you doing? You're communicating what you want done to the AI, and it will do what you're telling it to do. And it will try to read between the lines. Well, if you suck at communicating, how great are you going to be at using this kind of technology? Probably not that great. So it's the same we're taking the same concepts and just handing them over to tech. But again, going back to my comment about being efficiently ineffective, it's the same problem. You have to be effective and understand things before you can add the efficiency layer. And so you're seeing the exact same kind of problem and opportunity here. And so even if you're like, Dylan, I don't care about AI until 2030, great, not a problem. Still go do the foundational stuff. Become really good at communication. Get really good at writing SOPs and checklists. Like, do those foundational things. And then when inevitably you feel the urge to jump into this kind of tech, you'll already have the foundational knowledge you need to interact with it. That's my rant.
No, and it is just funny how communication is such a big piece right now. I mean, if you were to compare a teammate and an AI functionality, I was going to say agent, but we know it's not officially agents right now. If you don't communicate, if you miss a key piece of the puzzle communicating to either of them, they're not going to do the job that you'd like. So it makes sense that managers are going to be able to leverage it most quickly and effectively due to their communication skills. It's always funny how different people communicate, but also digesting information and being able to delegate effectively so that people can digest that information properly is as equally as important as the ability to digest the information that's presented to you. So, I had some really good managers in my past and some not so great ones, and they just would overthink things or assume that things were, picked up in the process that were missed or things like that.
Yeah.
And, no one's fault, but just communication is so important in every facet of that, especially when you're working with a tool that can't make assumptions. It is really only working with what you provide it, as compared to someone else who may have done a similar project. They may have additional context without it needing to be explicitly stated.
Well, it's funny because a lot of the prompt engineering stuff that I'm seeing right now, the way they're laying it out, it's like, okay, this is the task, this is the context, values, whatever. I'm like, wow, that's actually, I've heard that somewhere before. 365 delegation. It's a blog post by Profit Factory. If you just search, Profit Factory 365 delegation, it's the same thing. And this blog post is incredibly old, pre-AI. It's the same thing. And so it's just funny how a lot of these tech people are trying to recreate the wheel and be like, look what we're discovering. It's like, you're not discovering anything new. You are evolving this baby tech. I'm going to call it a toddler right now, in an isolated form, instead of looking out to the world and saying, well, what really are we doing here? Well, it's communication. Well, what are we communicating? Well, we're really trying to delegate it to do something for us. Okay, well, how do you do that correctly? Like, have we already solved this problem? And it's the same thing I did with Amazon, with wholesale. Nobody was saying that it was sales that was the skill. It's like, oh, go learn wholesale. You don't learn wholesale. That's not a skill. The skill of wholesale is sales. You have to be good at doing a few things: cold calling, cold emailing, handling objections, negotiation, all sales things. So I was like, okay, well, while everybody's over here trying to recreate the wheel and figure it out the hard way, I'm just going to go read a bunch of sales books, understand the basics there, go 80-20, apply that here, and then it starts to work. Right? It's so funny how we as humans stay in our little bubbles and say, well, we got to figure this out. Well, maybe somebody's already figured that out in a different industry, but it's just as applicable. So you kind of have to reach out to these other industries, and you really have to get outside of the Amazon, Walmart bubble sometimes. Not always. There's tons of value there, but if you can clarify what it is you're doing and put a name to that, terminology, sales, inventory management, whatever. Don't look for Amazon inventory management. Look at inventory management and go see how the best in the world does it. And then you can adapt that for these platforms, because there are going to be some nuances and differences, but you're starting from this amazing foundation layer that you can build upon, instead of just the little tactics, those little nuggets that you hear. What a lot of people do, they hear these little things and then they pack it together and say, this is how I do inventory management. You're missing the point. You took a bunch of short-term tactics, a bunch of hacks, really, and you said, this is my system. No. You need the foundation first, and then you add the hacks and the nuances on top of that. But if you can get good at doing that, it makes the world much easier to move through, in my opinion. I think this is why I love having ADD, because I will jump into completely random ideas, completely random subjects. But by doing that, I'm able to say, oh, that's this thing that I'm struggling to understand is actually very similar to this thing way over here. Now I get what's happening. I can create this this tree of knowledge, if you will, right? And it makes it easier at noticing patterns. So I can be like, this feels like that thing. Okay, let's just assume it is the same. Let's now figure out what the differences actually are. And you solve problems dramatically faster, without a doubt. So if you have ADD, it's a superpower, not a, I hate saying neurodivergent. I'm like, no, I have a weird brain that's awesome. It's funny talking to selling parents, right? I jump into a bunch of calls, and they'll be like, oh, you have ADD. What do I do for my kid? What do you mean? Let them thrive. Let them go down every rabbit hole, but get them to understand they are finding patterns. And if they apply those patterns in other areas where it makes sense, everything comes together pretty fast. And the Amazon Walmart space is one of those areas where there's a lot of patterns that other industries have already solved beautifully. And you can just go steal. I say that jokingly. You go copy their best practices, how they do it, and then adapt it to yourself. And all of a sudden, everybody wants to know how insanely smart you are and how are you pulling all this off. And you're like, I just reached out to a different industry.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Yeah, I think it's like the classic concept of being like too close to the problem, and you're working on changing things that are so specific or so detailed that it doesn't really move the needle that much in either direction.
Yeah.
You just got to zoom out, look at it from 1,000 miles away, boil it down to its most simple concept, and then find people that are, industry leading, whether it's the same industry or different, at whatever that concept may be. Like you said, you don't focus on wholesales, you focus on sales. What's sales, communication, and psychology? If you keep zooming out, you'll be able to find different avenues to then drill down deep in and apply similar concepts across those different categories. So, that was something my dad taught me. Zoom out on things and try to come up with, instead of like, here's the big problem with all of its details and its moving pieces, zoom it out and try to explain it in 1 or 2 sentences. And then how would you solve those 2 sentences if it wasn't your specific problem? Just solve those 2 sentences and then kind of pull from different folks, different experiences, industries, like we said.
Well, I like your analogy here of, layers, right? And if you think about selling on Amazon, okay, let's think about this in terms of niches and industries. Okay, Amazon reseller, very niche, very specific. You can kind of go deeper, but let's not. One layer above that is e-commerce. One layer above that is commerce. Okay, so instead of just staying at this reseller level of knowledge, go study e-commerce. Because again, there's going to be things that they have figured out that you can just adapt and move on. And what's interesting is most of the best education and knowledge in terms of finding best practices and stuff like that comes from the higher level industry, right? So it's not going to come from Amazon sellers. It's going to come from e-commerce businesses, companies, larger ones, people that have figured out scale and stuff like that. And what's crazy is because the competitive dynamics are slightly different, a lot of those companies will teach, here's how we do X. Or one thing that I really love is, and this is something we've tried to do, you will find companies in that industry that serve that general industry, and they will share details based on the data that they see and say, okay, here's what we've learned. Shopify is a great example of this. They teach you how to do it. Why? Well, because they have so much data on it. They're like, hey, we've seen millions of brands come through. Different levels. Here's what works and what doesn't work. Here's how the best do X, Y, and Z. And you can just go and say, great, I'm going to adapt that to myself. So I love the fact that you brought up like this layering approach, because I think that's very much what it is. Sometimes you go to a completely random industry and you find some nuggets, but I feel like most of the time you're going to the broader industry. I mean, same thing happened with us when we first started on the support side. No idea, never worked in it, don't know the best practices. So go up one layer. We're not an Amazon software company, we're a tech company. Language matters. Okay, well, what tools do tech companies use for support? Not what, support ticket, platforms do Amazon selling platforms use. No, we go one layer up and then say, okay, well, who has the best knowledge on this? And as it turns out, it's the company we use now. And so all of our amazing support, the foundations of that came from that company, because they're like, here's how you do it. Here's how you don't do it. Here's how to think about it. It's like, oh, cool. Now we have this model for how we make decisions, how we think about it, how we work within it. And now we didn't have to recreate that stuff. And, there's a reason why we don't need 20 support people to manage this. Whereas our competition, who has far less users, have 5-6 times the amount of support staff we have. And all this information is readily available and accessible and free. Crazy concept. So listen, if you want to move fast, if you want to figure things out fast, I think this is the kind of stuff you need to be hearing. This is the kind of stuff you need to be exploring. Again, it's very easy to get stuck in the seller bubble. Get outside of it, get around it. If you can do that, you will very quickly find yourself outpacing all your selling friends. And they're going to come begging you, how are you figuring this out? And you're going to feel funny and you're probably going to laugh and be like, they think I'm a genius. I know I got it from here, there, and there. But share it. Share that information. I think we need higher value content in the selling community that focuses a lot more on this foundational level of things. People jump into PPC, take one course, Amazon focused, nothing wrong with that. That's the platform you're on. But go look at people who geek out with PPC, period. Go study those things. It will give you a better foundation for how to make decisions. Because a lot of what happens in our space is you get taught a tactic, but you're not taught how to think. You're not taught how things work mechanically or mechanistically. So the moment something goes wrong, you can't solve it. You don't know how it actually works. If you go and figure those things out, now all of a sudden, while all your friends are struggling, they're like, oh, my discovery campaign doesn't work anymore. I just have to shut it down because I don't know what to do. You're like, oh yeah, it's just this one thing. I know how this works. Like, absolutely bonkers.
Yeah. And it's funny. A lot of folks are, to use like an Amazon selling specific example, it's like, hey, I'm not able to be competitive because other people are pricing below me. How do I be competitive? Well, you do that by being able to have a more competitive price. How do you have a more competitive price? You do that by making intelligent sourcing buys that allows you to have a competitive price without losing money. How do you become better at sourcing? Unfortunately, maybe just spending more time on it. Maybe using different tools, Keepo, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
But as you continue to boil things down, you realize that one problem isn't really the problem. It's 5 levels up. And once you solve that, the next 3 steps solve themselves. And then you're back to the problem that you're trying to solve. So yeah, it's really interesting to help just prioritize how you should be thinking about things and look a little bit more big picture as opposed to specific and being so caught up in the nitty gritty, because there are so many moving pieces. Like we always talk about, there's so much data that is now available. How do you decipher what's important data? Just continue to zoom out, find, instead of 12 metrics, find 3, and how do those 3 metrics will spill into other metrics. But yeah, focus on bigger things that'll make a larger impact overall.
Yeah. And by going to those foundational layers, it gives you a good guiding post for how to make those decisions. What I mean by that is a lot of times you're very reactionary. Something happened, I need to react to it. You need this kind of North Star to understand, how am I measuring and defining success here? Because it's all different for every kind of seller, depending on what you're building, what you're trying to accomplish. And if you can figure out what those things are, it will help you make better decisions. So that shiny object syndrome kind of goes away, because you can say, okay, yeah, that's really cool. How would that impact the things I care about? Think about it. If it doesn't, don't do it. Even if you're losing money or missing out on an opportunity, it doesn't matter, because you're clearly defining where you're going. That's your high level strategy. And now everything stems from that. Is it going to positively, negatively, or not impact it at all? Great. Easier to make a decision, because now you've built your own internal framework for how to make the right decision for you and what you're trying to accomplish. Otherwise, you're just building somebody else's business and you don't get what you're doing. And that's not a good place. I think it's fine when you're first getting started. But if you're really trying to build something serious, you can't rely on that. You got to be able to use first principles, get down to the nitty gritty of it, understand root cause analysis, stuff like that. And it's going to make you a powerhouse of a business. That's for sure. Cool. This was a great conversation. I'm glad we got to geek out. We do this every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. We'll be back here next week to do it again. And this is open office hours. You know, we're going to geek out if there's no questions, and have a good time, try to do some education, try to get you to think differently. But fundamentally, this weekly session is for you. It's to answer any questions you have. We call it open office hours because there is no format. We just want a ton of questions we can dive deep into, and just help speed you up, help you, again, think differently. We want you to succeed. We want you to, give us your burning questions, your biggest problems. And if we can, we want to help you solve those things and overcome those things. So with that, we're going to wrap up here for time. Casey, any last words?
No, just I know we typically open with like some sort of subject to kick off. We didn't really do that this week. There were no big headlines or news updates to really get you folks caught up on. But if there is anything top of mind, as always, feel free to come in and chat. Be like, hey, love office hours. Would love if you guys kicked off with this, that, or the other thing. We'll definitely kind of prioritize different subjects that come through, whether it takes the first 5 minutes or the first 10 minutes before jumping into questions. We always want to do discuss what's going to make the biggest impact for you. So if you have any ideas, feel free to share them with us. But that's all I got. Hope everybody has a good rest of the week.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.